Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports, where today we are talking some trade possibilities leading up a ways away to the trade deadline, as well as other news and notes around the NHL. Guys, as usual, thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Make sure you check out our website down below, i80sports.com, for all of our content. Our NHL content is there, as well as it is now the playoffs in the NFL leading up to the Super Bowl right now. So our NFL crew, all hands to the deck on that one. You want to check out our NFL content, NCAA football leading up to the NFL draft, absolutely. NBA still in full swing. And you got to check out our MLS content as well as our wrestling coverage. I actually made a cameo appearance on this past Wednesday show. Had a lot of fun watching that. If you guys want to check that out, that's every Wednesday night, checking out AEW. You definitely got to make sure you check that out. While you're there, hit up the shop, get yourself a t-shirt. We've got a bunch of new merch there as well. New merch that I'll be rocking pretty soon here. A lot of cool things happening over at the shop. You definitely want to check that out. Get yourself a t-shirt as low as $8. And make sure that you follow us on Twitter down below at I80_sports NHL. And if you're following us already, thank you guys so much because we greatly value all of your support. Without you guys, we can't do this on a weekly basis. And of course, if you're not on YouTube, if you're on our website right now, make sure you check us out on YouTube. And while you're there, subscribe, like, comment, all the algorithmic things that possibilities galore with fun stuff like that. I'm rambling at this point. How you doing today, Tom?
Doing well. Just recently celebrated a birthday, 34 years old is what it is.
Happy birthday to the chairman of the board here, Tom. Happiest of birthdays, man. Hope you had a good one. And I got a birthday coming up too, and I'm going to be getting older as well. So more gray hair, more salt and pepper for both of us. So it'll be great. But we're here to talk about the news. So let's go ahead. Let's dive in to the short week. That was the news of the week. Let's talk some NHL news.
The I-80 Sports Traffic Report, where you can find all your news and notes from the week.
Pretty light week of news this week in the NHL, but we did have one big piece of news from this past week as the Montreal Canadiens have officially hired their new general manager, and the new general manager is Kent Hughes. He is a former NHL player agent, and my question here is, Tom, to be honest, I had to do a little bit of research on this guy. I did not know anything about him, to be honest. Is he a good fit for the Habs? Why or why not?
In terms of fit, we have to sort of examine what kind of job he's going to do. And what we got to realize is this. His title is general manager, yes. That's very true. But here's the thing. General manager of the Montreal Canadiens only means that he's going to be taking care of the day-to-day operations, bringing guys up, sending guys down, making waiver claims, making small deals. This team is still very much, and this organization is still very much in the hands of Jeff Gorton. So basically, and I hate to say it, it's sort of the same thing that Gorton did with David Quinn in New York with naming him as head coach. It's getting a guy some experience in a position to maybe go off to another position somewhere down the line. Like I said, he has responsibilities that I had previously mentioned, but in terms of being GM, Jeff Gorton is still calling all the shots. There's no secret about that.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've heard a couple chirps from people saying well, it's kind of weird that you're hiring a player agent as a general manager. Not so. This is not by far the first time that we have ever seen a player agent jump right into a general manager's role. The last person that I remember in my memory, and I know that there's definitely been people in between, Brian Burke, former general manager of Vancouver Canucks.
I got one more guy. I'm sorry, okay. I didn't mean to cut you up.
Yeah,
Mike Barnett, when Wayne Gretzky was coaching in Phoenix, Mike Barnett was his agent. He was the GM over there in Phoenix. And I don't mean to cut you up about Brian Burke. Brian Burke actually was the in charge of the vice president of the NHL, in charge of discipline before he went over to become the GM in Vancouver.
Yeah, but before then he was.
No, that's right. Agent. That's right. I'm sorry. That's right.
Yeah, before then he was a player agent, and actually, he was vice president of hockey operations. But before that, he was the assistant GM for Vancouver. It was only after their general manager stepped down that he went back and actually became the general manager.
Pat Quinn, rest in peace.
Pat Quinn, exactly. Rest in peace, Pat Quinn. But I mean, to me, it's an interesting move. It does feel out of left field, but sometimes moves that are right out of left field turn out to be the best. It's no secret. The Montreal Canadiens need a culture shock at this point, and maybe this is the move that kind of shakes the earth for Montreal. We'll see how he does as the deadline approaches and what his approach for this team going forward is going to be over the next coming year. Change is a-coming, and Montreal could be in desperate need for a change, and we could see some interesting players leaving Montreal in no time soon, especially because they're a team right now that is hurting desperately. They are one of the worst teams in the NHL currently. But that's going to do it for our big news for this week. It's time to move already over to our quick hits. So I'll keep this short and sweet. So Willie O'Ree's number has been retired by the Bruins. It was a very good ceremony. It was very well done. And congratulations to Willie O'Ree, greatly deserved to get your number retired by the Boston Bruins. The NHL plans to end the regular season on time, despite all of the postponements as of late. It's still the intention to end on time. There has been rescheduling that has been undergone. Off the top of my head, the Devils are going to be playing 15 or 16 games in a matter of like 27 days in April. So, the NHL is doing their best to reschedule these games. And so that way the NHL season is not prolonged. Moving forward with that, to try to discourage postponements, the NHL has agreed to stop testing asymptomatic players, namely players who are already vaccinated, which 99% of the league is vaccinated at this point, and they have agreed to stop testing the asymptomatic players. So this is a potential step in the right direction here. Dmitry Orlov of the Washington Capitals has been suspended 2 games for a pretty dangerous kneeing play. If you want to go back, it not a good looking play. So 2 games to him, he will be suspended for. Moving on, waiver wire for the 3rd week in a row. We had another player placed on waivers this week. Gemel Smith placed on waivers by the Tampa Bay Lightning, and he was claimed on 3rd week in a row. A player is being claimed off of waivers. He was claimed by Detroit. Interesting move here for Detroit because already on their roster, they have his brother, Giovanni Smith, on the roster. So reuniting the brothers in Detroit, that is going to be really, really fun to watch. If you're a Detroit fan, shout out to Bex on Twitter. Hope you're doing well. Hope to have you on at some point soon. But just like that, we're moving on to our main segment. So as always, guys, it's time to pump the brakes.
Not so fast. It's time to pump the brakes.
So I know we're a ways away from the trade deadline at this point, and I actually don't have the official date of the trade deadline offhand in the back of my head. I think it is the end of March, early April at this point, though. Don't quote me on that. I'll look up an official date as we go through with this. But we're talking potential trade targets, only because we have had some interesting players that have requested a trade over the course of the past few months and even as of recently. And we've also had some interesting players that just are starting to get some rumblings that they might be unhappy with where they currently are, including one very interesting target that might be more of like a fantasy deal. But we're going to be talking about these players. We're going to be talking about where we think could be a good fit for them, where they could realistically go at the deadline, as well as do we honestly think that these are players that are going to move by the deadline. So moving right along with this, we're going to start off with a name that just recently decided that he would like to be dealt from this team. We are talking about John Klingberg of the Dallas Stars, their star defenseman, pun intended, and he's looking to get shipped out of town. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of this year. He wants to test the waters. He wants to see if he can land with a contender and maybe just see if he can just boost his status going into free agency for the first time. So, Tom, where do you think is a good fit right now for John Klingberg? Do you think he moves?
I definitely think he moves. My opinion, I would say the Carolina Hurricanes at this point, they're in need of some defensive depth, which he brings. They're a team that has playoff aspirations. They want to go deep. They think they can contend for a cup. He's been there with Dallas. He was there on their run in 2020. He was there the year before. On the 2020 run to the finals, he was close to a point per game player. And you put him on that second or third pair. Excuse me. I don't know what the hell happened there. You put him on that second or third pair, with him and Tony D there, and I'm not saying they pair them together, that really will fill in that hole that was left by Dougie Hamilton. I think Tony DeAngelo has partially filled it, but I think bringing in John Klingberg will completely fill it, and it won't be even a question anymore. So if he was to go anywhere, I would say Carolina would probably be the best place to go.
Well, I'm going to agree with you on both fronts. First of all, Klingberg is almost certainly going to move at the deadline. He is an unrestricted free agent. Dallas does not want to lose him for free at all, especially since they are starting to think about maybe retooling over these next few years as well, because they've got some young assets that are looking good. They've got a couple older players that are, still filling, the void at the moment. Klingberg is certainly the golden goose of this year's trade deadline as we approach the moving and shaking that is the trade deadline. Granted, like I said before, the deadline is still a ways away, but big names have moved well ahead of the deadline in the past. I mean, the first one that comes to mind being a Devils fan, Taylor Hall moved in December, well ahead of the trade deadline a few years ago and moved to Arizona. So we could see Klingberg move ahead of the trade deadline here. I'm going to agree on Tom's front. Carolina does seem like a great fit. But to play devil's advocate, at what cost? Because that is the one thing that not a lot of people are talking about with Klingberg. He is going to cost quite a pretty penny. If I had to guess in terms of the significant pieces that need to move for John Klingberg to move, because people forget John Klingberg is a top 15 defenseman in this league. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And he's going to garner that money too. What it will take to probably get John Klingberg, you need an NHL player already. So you need a rostered NHL player, whether it's a defenseman or whether it's a forward. You need an NHL rostered player. You need a top 5 prospect from the franchise. So it doesn't need to be your top prospect, but it needs to be somebody of interesting note and interesting ability, and a few premium picks. Now, here's the problem, though, with Carolina. They have an NHL ready player that they can absolutely deal in this. There's no doubt about that. They have plenty of depth. They do have top 5 prospects that they are not afraid to trade. They have showed that they're not afraid to trade them in the past to bring up, the Devils yet again. I'm sorry that I keep bringing up the Devils with this, but that's how the Devils got Yanni Kuokkanen. Yanni Kuokkanen was at one time Carolina's, one of their top 5 prospects a few years ago. And they could easily move somebody this year in a deal for this. The hang up though right now is 2 things: the picks and the money, which Carolina's kind of hurting for at the moment on both ends. Carolina has already lost their first-round pick for this year as compensation for signing Jesperi Kotkaniemi this offseason. If people forget, when you offer sheet somebody with the money that Kotkaniemi got, which was over $5 million, the compensation is a first-round draft pick. So Carolina needed to sacrifice that to sign Jesperi Kotkaniemi. So that means that they're without their first-round pick. They will need to finesse to kind of get a deal done. That's not to say that they would not be opposed to dealing their first round pick next year, but this is part of the problem. You start dealing these types of futures in consecutive years. This is what leads to a major rebuild later on. And I think Carolina wants to try to stay on top of the Metropolitan Division for as long as they possibly can and build a dynasty of sorts. So it could hurt to deal a first round pick in a move like this, but at the same time, if it means winning a Stanley Cup, any team's going to do what it can possibly take to get it done. And John Klingberg can certainly be a difference maker. He is no stranger to the Stanley Cup Finals. He was there 2 years ago with the Dallas Stars. So we're just going to have to monitor and see where John Klingberg goes. Another name coming off the top of the head as a potential trade target. We're still looking at defensemen here, ironically enough. But this time we're looking in Arizona, and it's one of Arizona's top defensemen and one of their youngest defensemen, Jacob Chychrun. And he's a big trade target. But here's the devil's advocate side. He's a potential building block for Arizona. So this is maybe a little bit more unlikely to happen, but I'll be curious to see where Tom goes with this one. Tom, do you see Jacob Chychrun moving? If he does, where does he go?
All right, I want to preface this with one thing. For every Ranger fan out there who's pining for these guys, what's the name of this segment? Pump the brakes. So I want you all to pump the brakes. It's going to cost entirely too much money to bring him in. We have a power play quarterback in Adam Fox to run that first power play unit. We have Trouba on the second power play unit, who, despite being a guy who could throw the body around, remember, Jacob Trouba was a 50-point guy once upon a time. I have all confidence in Jacob Trouba on that second power play unit. You still have Nils Lundqvist, who, this year hasn't dazzled, but is still in the minor leagues, and I am not ready to give up on him yet. And we have Braden Schneider there, too, who could become, a good offensive defenseman as well. I think he'd be more of kind of like a two-way guy, but still. Ranger fans, we're not getting this guy. We don't need this guy. Okay, everyone says that this is a piece of the Stanley Cup puzzle. If this team maybe went on a run to a conference final last year, maybe I'd agree with that a little bit. But you don't need him. The package is going to be too much. And in reality, this team needs wingers. They don't need defensemen. Now, let me move on to my next point here. I'm going to leave the Rangers behind. I would say if he was going to be moved anywhere, the Florida Panthers might be a good fit for him, depending on what the pieces going back would be. He could fit right in onto the second pair, for 5-on-5. He could team with Ekblad on that first power play unit, or basically they could have their first and second unit, have Ekblad QB in the first unit, and have Chutrin QB in the second unit. It would be great for the Panthers, for a team that's definitely going to have to gear up for some playoff battles, whether it be with the Toronto Maple Leafs, whether it be with their in-state rivals and two-time defending champions, the Tampa Bay Lightning, or whether it be with the Boston Bruins, who just have a ton of experience as well. I think that if he was to go anywhere, that's where I think the most logical destination for him would be. But at the same time, you look at Arizona. They're not in good shape. We don't know where they're going to be playing next year, whether it be there, whether it be Portland, Houston, Oklahoma City, Kansas City, Quebec City, Hamilton, Ontario. Pick a name out of a hat, whatever you want. For a team that may be relocated, and a team that also has a ton of draft picks, wherever you're going to be next year, this guy could be a huge selling point. This would be a guy you might want to market to some potential new fans in a different city. So to be honest with you, and for a team that has a ton of draft picks and is really in rebuild mode, I wouldn't let him go. I just don't think it's a good idea. I don't think letting him go is a good idea. I just think where you're going to move him to, the draft picks you might get back, I just don't know if they're appealing enough to let him go when he could be a building block and maybe even be a leader of a bunch of young kids, and maybe one of those young kids that could play with him, on a power play line could be a guy like Shane Wright or Connor Bedard in the future, for argument's sake. So I personally would say he's probably going to stay right where he is.
Yeah, so I'm going to agree with Tom here. Personally, I just don't see Jacob Chychrun moving just because he's such a massive building block. And if Arizona turns things around, and it's going to take a while for Arizona to turn things around, but he's locked up with them for the next 4 years. He would be an unrestricted free agent as of the, hold on, I want to make sure I get this right. The 2025-2026 season, that would be his very first UFA year. Right now, his cap hit is at $4.6 million. He's only 23. If they turn it around in the next 3 to 4 years, entering the prime years of his career, and possibly still playing alongside Victor Soderstrom, who the Arizona Coyotes also still have, which could be a potential deadly combo of a two-headed monster on defense. But hey, I'll humor it right now. Let's say that that Arizona wants to get greedy. And I'm already kind of like let myself go on this one. But a potential trade target, in my mind, San Jose. And people are kind of thinking to themselves, like, San Jose, that doesn't sound like that interesting of a target. Well, it's actually not. I think it's actually more interesting than a lot of people think. San Jose is currently in the playoff hunt right now. And we're at the midway point of the season. They're in 4th place in the Pacific. And sure, the Pacific is not great right now. It's more competitive than we thought. But San Jose is sticking with it. They have a winning record right now. They're 21-17-2. Picking up a piece like Jacob Chitrin would be huge at this point for a team like San Jose. And what would be even more awesome for San Jose is to have their cake and eat it too. Get rid of some dead money that they currently have in one of either Brent Burns, Erik Karlsson, or Marc-Edouard Vlasic. Getting rid of one of those three players in a deal like this, sure, maybe you make some sacrifices in here to get a deal like that done. Maybe you give a little bit more to try to get somebody like that off the books, but you're getting Jacob Chitrin in return. That's huge. Now for Arizona, one big thing to keep in mind as we enter, the phase of, teams starting to trade players for assets, Arizona is stockpiled right now in terms of picks. We talked about this earlier on in our team previews. If you want to go check that out from the summertime, check out our Arizona team preview from earlier on before the season began. But in the first two rounds, just the first two rounds of this upcoming draft, they have 8 draft picks. They have 3 first-round picks, and they have 5 second-round picks. They have been wheeling and dealing for the past year and a half to acquire these picks. They are looking really, really healthy in terms of their draft stock right now, and especially considering one of the picks in the first round they have is Montreal's pick. Now, it's a conditional pick. They might not end up with a top 10 pick because of that. They probably will end up getting a different pick because of this, but it's still going to be a first-round pick for this upcoming year, which is huge for Arizona in their building. And what could be even better? Picking up another first-round pick for a guy like Jacob Chitrin, which is absolutely what he is going to command. He is, in no doubt in my mind, going to command a first-round pick. He's a player that is currently under control for the next 4 years at a pretty, below market value for him at $4.6 million per year, when he should probably be making closer to $7 million per year. So any team's going to need to cough up a lot. San Jose has what it needs to get it done. Moving right along, we got a twofer in this one just because these are two players that have requested a trade from the same team. We're talking here, of course, about Jake DeBrusk and Zach Senyshyn of the Boston Bruins. I think this is more likelier to go down. So, twofer. They don't have to land on the same team. But, Tom, where do you think Jake DeBrusk and Zach Senyshyn end up?
Well, I'm going to rewind it a week, and like I always say, I hate to sound like a broken record here, but remember last week we were talking about Evander Kane and the Edmonton Oilers and the needs of the Edmonton Oilers. They needed a depth forward. They needed somebody with that playoff experience. Well, Jake DeBrusk checks both of those boxes for me. He's a depth forward. You could put him in your middle six. You could maybe even put him on your top line if you really needed to. He's been through those playoff wars with Boston, and he was a huge part of that depth rebuild the Bruins did last decade around 2015 and 2016 to get themselves back to being a contending team. So I could easily see him going to Edmonton if they could work something out. I think Edmonton would be a great fit for Jake DeBrusk. I really do. I think he's exactly what the Oilers need if they want to bring another forward in. As far as Senyshyn goes, really hard to tell. I mean, I think he would probably have to go to a bottom feeder. He's from Ottawa, so maybe they want to do him a favor, send him home, play in Ottawa in front of his hometown fans, in front of his family, friends, and he could get a lot of ice time with Ottawa. Ottawa right now, sort of a Jekyll and Hyde team, still kind of rebuilding, but they also have some pieces in Brady Tkachuk and Tim Stützle. So I could easily see him going to Ottawa and, maybe making his, breaking his way into the league up in Ottawa. So I think it might be a good fit for him as well.
Yeah, I think Ottawa would be honestly a great stop for both of these players, to be quite honest. I mean, it would be a place where I don't think Ottawa's that afraid to kind of trade a few picks to go out and get either of these players right now. And with Senyshyn, he's certainly his stock has dropped quite a bit after being drafted in the first round a few years back. I mean, more than a few years back at this point. So any team that's getting him, it's potential high risk, high reward, but he's not going to yield a high return for Boston. What they're really hoping for is that they get a decent return for Jake DeBrusk. There are plenty of teams out there that could go and do this. Edmonton, as Tom mentioned before, would be a great fit. Another potential good fit is Seattle. Seattle is hurting for top 6 talent, and Jake DeBrusk could finally really spread his wings as a potential top 9, top 6 forward for the Seattle Kraken. They're hurting for scoring depth right now. They could go out and do it, but the question becomes with Seattle is, would they be willing to trade the draft capital to go get him? But it's no secret with Boston right now, they're hurting in their prospect pool right now. There's really not a lot in terms of their prospect pool coming up. So I'd really be interested to see what they try to offer up to get rid of a Jake DeBrusk, to get rid of a Zach Sension, just to see how they kind of retool that prospect pool a little bit. That's one way that they could do it. Seattle could be a good landing spot. Ottawa could be a great landing spot. And for DeBrusk, Edmonton is almost like the perfect landing spot for him. If Edmonton doesn't get that deal done, that would be a big miss on their part, in my mind at least. We're throwing it back to the summertime now when we were talking about this particular player, but it's funny because a lot of people, I think, have kind of forgotten about this player as a potential trade target, and I think he's going to surprise some people if he ends up getting moved. Vladimir Tarasenko of the St. Louis Blues. Some people may have forgotten. He requested a deal back in July of this past year. A deal never happened, and he's been playing for St. Louis since. But, Tom, does Tarasenko move? If he does, where's he going?
No idea. I mean, right now, it's hard. It's hard to even think of it, because right now you look at the St. Louis Blues. They're in second place in the Central Division. I mean, Colorado's above them, and I think we all knew, even though people wanted to criticize Colorado early on in the season, we all knew once Colorado got their act together, they were going to move right into that spot, and they have games in hand on everybody, yeah. But, I mean, St. Louis right now, in terms of that division, really just has Nashville and Minnesota to compete with. And I think they're definitely better than Nashville, and I think they're a little bit better than Minnesota, too. But so at the same time, you're a second-place team with potential for home ice in that first round. And the real question is, as much as he wants to be traded, how can you trade one of your best players away who's still there and producing, who isn't holding out, who's holding up his end of the bargain? It'd have been different if St. Louis was wallowing, was a bubble team, was on the bottom of the West. I'd say, yeah, we have a ton of destinations where he could possibly go. But I mean, could maybe Pittsburgh pull something off? They pulled it off with Jeff Carter last year. Could they bring him in? Because you can tell they're trying to go for one less kick at the can. Could Tampa, who's going for 3 in a row, maybe just say, okay, we're going to pull some magic out of our hat somehow and bring him in here? But the reality is, in terms of where St. Louis is right now, I can't see him going anywhere during this season. I can't. Maybe over the summer again, they revisit this. But it's hard. It's hard to see him going, first of all, to any division rival. I just can't see the Blues doing that to shoot themselves in the foot. If he's going to go anywhere, he's going to go to the East. But right now, with the position St. Louis is in, and if they stay in that position, I don't think he's going anywhere.
Yeah, it's tough to call on this one because earlier in the summer, I would have said a metropolitan team like the New Jersey Devils or the New York Islanders. It's tough to say now. I think if there is a likely team that could get it done, and I never put anything past Lou Lamoriello, the Islanders could honestly be a really, really good fit for Vladimir Tarasenko if you think about it. I almost see it as Lou Lamoriello going and picking up another Alexander McGillney, another Ilya Kovalchuk, as a deadline type of splash move. I don't know what it would take for Lou Lamoriello to get a deal like that done. I don't know if it's in the Islanders' best interest, but it could be the proper shakeup that they need in the top 6 to really, really get things going. They're starting to get things going again. They're starting to look a lot better as of late, but that could be a potential target for me. Another team, and they would have to do a lot of money moving, and they would really have to finesse it, but maybe Colorado gets desperate enough that they go and do that. I don't see it, though. I can't
see them trading them to their division rival.
Yeah, I've heard some people saying like Colorado would be a great fit. No, I don't think that they wouldn't break down the door to do that.
They're not gonna do it so they can. I mean, didn't they learn this lesson with Brett Hull? They let Brett Hull walk as a free agent to Dallas, and basically he embarrassed them in the playoffs the following year and won himself the Stanley Cup. Pretty
much. It wouldn't make any sense to me.
I mean, he was a free agent. He wasn't traded, but at the same time, look, if they're not going to let him walk because somebody in the West would jump on him, they're going to trade him out east somewhere if they're going to do it at all.
Yeah. Wouldn't make sense to me. Now, the last trade target that we're going to talk about is a fantasy deal in and of itself. But we'll humor it just because, look, if Wayne Gretzky can get dealt, anybody can get dealt at this point. Connor McDavid. And it's kind of ironic that we're talking about another fellow Edmonton Oiler here. So, all right, Tom, let's humor it. Does he go anywhere? And why not?
Let me preface it with this. That Wayne Gretzky trade was because Peter Pocklington didn't have the money to keep him. There was no salary cap. There was no revenue sharing. The league at the time in 1989, if you look at the league from the 22 years to 1967 to 1989, the league had almost quadrupled in size. You know, scouts were having to go to the ends of the earth to find new players. The old scouting systems were basically destroyed. You know, Gretzky sort of came out of nowhere, jumped on Edmonton, was never drafted. And then when Edmonton won their cups in the 80s, all of a sudden Gretzky found out players in different cities were making a lot more money, and so was he. And Pocklington knew he didn't have that money. He didn't have the revenue sharing, and there was no cap. That's why Gretzky was moved. He wasn't moved for any other reason than that. Believe me, Pocklington and Sather have said many, many times that if that team were in New York or Montreal or Chicago or Toronto, Gretzky would have never been gone. Messier would have never been gone, and maybe even Paul Coffey would have never been gone. Paul Coffey was moved more because of his attitude than anything. But we're done with the history lesson for right now. Here's the thing with McDavid. The Contenders, he wants to win. Here's the problem. Contenders probably can't afford him with that money, with the money he's making. So here's the other problem. A bottom feeder could afford him with a lot of cap space. But what would that do? What would that change? He's going from a bubble team to a losing team. So what would that do? So basically right now, Connor McDavid, for as good as he is with the cap hit that he has, is stuck. He's theoretically right now stuck. He's still very young. He's how old is he now? 18. I'm trying to do the math in my head.
Want me to look it up real quick?
No, don't. He was 18 in 2015, so he's 25 right now. He's still got a lot of time, man. He's still got a lot of time left. You know, I can't see him going anywhere. It's not going to help him to go to another losing team. It's not going to help a contender who wants to win a cup if they have to gut half of their depth and a star out of there to bring him in. It doesn't help anybody, so he's stuck.
Yeah, I don't see him going anywhere realistically. He's going to be an Edmonton Oiler for quite a while. But like I said before, if Wayne Gretzky can get dealt, anybody can get dealt. And I'm just kind of thinking in my mind of like teams with like prospect pools and teams that aren't doing bad right now that are starting to turn things around. And it's kind of funny because I'm seeing parallels here. Maybe you can kind of go with me on this one. But if there's one team that I'd be curious to see if they could realistically get it done, and there is one team that could potentially realistically get this done, and you're all going to laugh at me, and I'm fine with it, the Los Angeles Kings. And they have a couple interesting pieces to actually make a deal like this realistically happen. They have a player an NHL ready player right now that can go over there very easily. It would hurt as an LA fan to see this, but if you're trying to swap money and proper money, you would probably have to deal Anze Kopitar in something like this because you would need to give something realistic back. You need to give the center of the future back as well. Quentin Byfield, bye-bye. And you would have to give quite a bit of compensation, which LA really hasn't given much away in terms of their prospect pool. They have plenty of prospect depth. They have one of the better prospect depths in all of the NHL currently. They have, all of their picks. They haven't dealt any of their picks. Any picks that they dealt, were swapped with Pittsburgh, and they have their third round pick this year after dealing it away. They've got the picks to do it. They've got the players to do it. They've got the prospect pool to do it. They have the money after trading Anze Kopitar to do it. That is a team that I think that realistically, if it were to ever happen, I would find it hilarious that it would be LA that swoops in and gets the franchise player from Edmonton again. But realistically, does it happen? No. I mean, I'm just talking about fantasies right now with this. Like, there's no way it happens. Or does it? We'll just have to see.
You know what's funny? You brought that up, though. There was a rumored trade to Detroit and when Gretzky was, being offered up. That LA deal was actually like one of the worst deals they could have took, but it just worked out for Gretzky because he could go somewhere where he could be anonymous. And that's kind of similar to what Detroit offered, because Detroit's package had Steve Yzerman as like the main piece. So just imagine if Gretzky was traded and then it theoretically actually would have made the Oilers better. You would have had Mark Messier and Steve Yzerman as your 1-2 punch down the middle.
Yeah, that would have been ridiculous if that were to happen. I mean, then again, Yzerman was almost dealt twice in his career. What came this close to being dealt? Yeah, three times. Came very close to being dealt 3 times in his career. At like literally all it was pending was a call to the NHL office. But hey, we're going to move away from these NHL deals for right now. We're certainly going to be revisiting this as the trade deadline approaches. I actually looked it up. The trade deadline this year is March 21st, so there will be plenty of trade talks coming up. You're going to want to stick around for that as we go through. But now it's time to move away from trade possibilities right now. Let's talk about some high performers of the week. Let's talk about high performance in the NHL.
Your I-80 Sports High Performance Players of the Week.
We're talking some high performers of the week. Tom, who do you want to highlight this week? And I know I'm going to be pissed off with the first person.
Ryan Reeves!
Oh, my God.
2 goals last night and a hilarious interview at the end of the game.
Terrible.
It wasn't terrible, man. The only reason the Rangers won that game is because that fourth line kept them in it in the first period and for most of the second period. Then the rest of the team woke up and said, hey, wait a minute. We're playing the Toronto Maple Leafs. They screw up all the time. Let's make them screw up again. Unfortunately, now you have most of my delusional fellow fans thinking that this team's just going to walk to a Stanley Cup, which if they turned on the Colorado game right after that, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Meanwhile, it couldn't possibly get any worse in terms of the players that you want to highlight. So
what more do you want me to say? Brad Marchand, 10 points in 5 games. The Bruins are coming on strong, like I had said, into that wild card spot. What more can I say? I know these are 2 controversial players. These are 2 very controversial players. But I got to give credit where credit's due. I really do.
Gross. No, I do give credit where credit's due. Ryan Reeves scoring his first 2 goals of the season, by the way, last night in that game on Wednesday night. Brad Marchand, just 10 points in 5 games. That's just stellar work for the Bruins. The Bruins are getting hot and quick. I've got 2 players that I want to highlight this week. One's obvious. The other one might not be so obvious. Timo Meier with the San Jose Sharks. My goodness, with the Joe Thornton hat trick the other night. 5 goals in 1 game. Have a game. And he scored 4 of those goals in about 22 minutes, something stupid like that. So ridiculous play by Timo Meier. Hats off to you. All of the hats go to him on that one. And the second player I want to highlight here, Drew Doughty with the Los Angeles Kings, earning that money right now because kind of quietly right now, one of the best defensemen in the entire league right now. 20 points in 21 games played. He is one of the main reasons why LA is currently in a playoff spot, approaching the halfway mark of this season. But before we wrap up our show today, it's time for our question of the day. The question of the day is, will Connor McDavid be an Oiler for life? So, Tom, is he in Edmonton for life?
Well, there's one deciding factor here. It depends on how many Stanley Cups he wins. If he wins a cup or 2, I think he retires as an Oiler. I really do. If he can win himself a cup or 2 or 3, I don't think you're going to see a repeat of the 1980s with 4 and 5 years. That just doesn't happen anymore. But, he wins 1 or 2 down the line, then yeah, I think he stays in Edmonton, retires an Oiler. If in, say, 10, 12 years from now, the Oilers are faltering, maybe they've gotten to a finals but didn't win, maybe they haven't, maybe they're playoff chokers, maybe they just can't get over the hump, at that point, the contract will be up. Maybe they re-sign him for less, and maybe he does have to pull Raymond Bourque and go somewhere else to try to win one. But I think with Connor McDavid and with the fanfare that he has, I just can't see him as a player retiring without one Stanley Cup. So, yeah, I could see him being moved if the Oilers don't win one within the next 10 to 12 years.
It's interesting to me because on one hand, I could see Connor McDavid being an Oiler for life if they do win a Stanley Cup or two in the next couple of years. Interesting note, Connor McDavid is an unrestricted free agent as of 2026, 2027. That is 4 more years of team control. Or sorry, 5 more years. I suck at math. 5 more years of team control. So if 5 years from now they have not won a Stanley Cup, he could very well easily turn to Edmonton and just say, you know what? Get me to a contender. Send me to the best place I have at winning a cup. And he will do it. A top caliber player knows, what they want.
But if he's unrestricted, he gets to decide where he wants to go.
That's true. This is also true. So it's going to be really interesting to monitor Connor McDavid's career over the next few years. It's going to be really interesting to see if he does stay on Edmonton going forward. Personally, I think probably not. I'm going to just hedge my bets and just say the seeds have been planted right now that he is unhappy with the organization, and they need to do some things to do right by him over these next, few years to really, saddle him in for the long haul. Not everybody can be a Sidney Crosby. You stay with the same team forever. So be interesting to see what happens. But hey, as usual, guys, do agree, do disagree with our takes? Let us know down below in the comment section below. And if you're there already, drop a like. And if you're not subscribed already, subscribe, because we've got more and more content coming out over the next few weeks. Next week, we are doing our mid-season report. You don't want to miss that. But where else can you find our content? Glad you asked. i80sports.com down below, where you can check out our NHL, NFL, MLS, NCAA football, NBA, and wrestling content there as well. While you're there, hit up the shop, get yourself a t-shirt as low as $8. And if you're on Twitter, make sure you follow us down below at i80_sportsNHL. And if you're following us already, thank you guys so much, because we greatly value all of your support. Thank you guys so much as usual. But it's time to move away from here. Next week, we've got the mid-season report. We're looking forward to bringing that to you guys, talking about some winners and losers so far amongst the NHL. But you got to tune in next week to check that out. So, as always, I'm Brian. He's been Tom. This has been yet another episode of NHL on i80 Sports.